Hi, my name's Jane Scarf, and I'm coming to you from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And I have some mixed news, some bad news, and some good news. Bad news is they have passed the vaccine passport into regulation yesterday, where we were saying before there's nothing anywhere. It's not even a rinky dinky bylaw. Well, now it's a rinky dinky bylaw. But not to worry, because there's some good news. The good news is that when the government is regulating private individuals like shop owners or anywhere, rinks, for example, skating rinks, hockey, like issues related to access to the rink, any sports or any services, those individuals who are enforcing the vaccine passport are acting as agents of the government for the enforcement of these regulations. Therefore, their actions and they are covered under the Criminal Code of Canada because all enforcement is covered under there. And that means it's a federal matter. That means Canadian Bill of Rights applies. So, whatever they are doing, they cannot do it in violation of your rights. So, they cannot be required to violate rights. So the public health can have them do various things, even passing out a fine. I don't think would be a specific. Well, it depends on what it defines for, but regardless, it could be fines. But in this case, there's force being used. The denial of the service is the force. So there is a clear violation of your rights if you're being told you must show your vaccine status. In other words, you must allow us to invade your privacy or you're not using these services. That's a violation of life, liberty, security of person, and it's not lawful. And the business can also refuse to do it because Canadian Bill of Rights. They can, literally say that they're going to be under that, and that it would be against the law if they actually, use the whole passport thing. So that's the good news, and we need to put that in our and if we're making any notice of liability or lawsuit against a company that's refusing services, that's going to be one of your strongest arguments. And there's other arguments as well. There's other legislation. There's Nuremberg, even though CTV is saying it doesn't, Nuremberg doesn't apply because these vaccines are approved by Health Canada. Well, they're not. They're approved for emergency use or interim use, which is not the same as approval. They've had approval from the World Health Organization, which is not the process for approval in Canada. Approval in Canada has to come from the Ministry of Health federal, and that hasn't happened. So it's still in experimental stages. And if it's in experimental stages, the Nuremberg principles do apply. But even if they don't apply, it doesn't mean there's no issue. We still have all kinds of privacy laws. We have court precedents up to actually 2020 that apply, okay, in the pandemic. So they can't be saying, oh, pandemic is a good enough reason to override your right to privacy, because Supreme Court confirmed right to privacy in 2020 with regard to PCR testing. So that's a strong precedent that can be applied to all cases of breach of privacy because they all relate to the pandemic. And there was one in 2012, Supreme Court of Ontario confirmed that no person can violate another person's a right to privacy. And so it's not just a government to individual, it's person to person. And if the rights are violated, that's a cause of action to sue. And health information is considered to be sensitive information and protected under this privacy process and right to sue. So we're still looking good. Nothing's really changed in terms of our legal rights and our capacity to move forward in holding them accountable through the notice of liability process that Rebecca Shepherd and I have been setting up for you to use. It's free templates and explanations, and there's video that we did Zooms where we're answering questions and so on. And you can also send an email either to Rebecca Shepherd at rebeccastanforthee@gmail.com, and the 4 is the number 4. And all the documents that are, and actually I'll give my email as well, is mjslegalservices@yahoo.com. And the documents I'm talking about can be found on the website standforthee.ca. And again, it's the number 4, and the is THEE. So let's rock it and roll it. And we know several people, or not several people, hundreds of people actually, have already filed these NOLs. And we know of one town where several individuals in the town are suing the town for having passed a directive that the rinks cannot be used for leagues or anything unless those leagues establish a vaccine passport process. So they're going to get it. They're getting their notices of liability this week, and they're all going to be initiating lawsuits. And don't forget, you can still do collections, and you can even do collections once the formal proceedings begin, because still owe the money. And before it even goes to court, you can lien their house. You can report a delinquent debt to Equifax, which affects their credit rating, and you can either do it yourself or hire a company to pursue that debt. So a violation of your rights is normally considered $5,000 or $6,000 from the court, but there's other damages as well, depending on what kind of service it is. And there's damages to the businesses as well, because they're going to lose all their unvaccinated clients, and they may not want to do that or even care about this stupid whole process, because it's a virus equal to the deadliness of a flu. And the vast majority of people just get flu symptoms and they're gone. It's people with underlying conditions that get serious version of it or death from it. So this has always been the case. Like, all of the flus have been like that. The common cold is like that. People die, it gets into pneumonia, and if they have a weak system, they can't combat the pneumonia, and they die. So are we going to, bring out the friggin' parade on colds? And in comparison to, for example, the chances of killing somebody with your car versus your chance of getting COVID, spreading it to somebody else, and they die, it's like two worlds of difference. And so are we going to say abolish all cars because there's a risk, a high risk, relatively high risk, that you're going to kill somebody when you're driving in your car? I'm not saying that. We're not doing that. It's preposterous. And if people were, if you sit everybody down and you say, okay, here's the deal. This is how deadly it is. This is how many die. This is what we've always had with the flu. Do you want to do all this, including severe infringements of your privacy, your bodily integrity, locking down your business, your right to enjoy property? There's a whole host of rights that they're overriding with all of this. And all these procedures, all these medical procedures, the mask medical procedure, the lockdown is a medical procedure, And now the vaccine is a medical procedure. And you have a right to informed consent, a well-established, long-established right to informed consent, which is protected in the Canadian Bill of Rights. So that's another element that can be brought in. It's Section 1A, your right to life, liberty, and security of person. That's where your right comes from. And we have also an implied Bill of Rights that even was in existence, recognized by the courts before 1960, and where they came from is the establishment of your common law rights, and that took place over 2 decades, ongoing with court precedents acknowledging your rights. And then the Bill of Rights recognizes that your rights are inalienable. Government didn't give them to you. It says, excuse me, a bill in recognition and protection of your human rights and freedoms. And this piece of legislation is still flying high. Canadian, established and presented for Canadians in the interest of Canadians, and primarily it was established 1960 to keep communism out of Canada. And if we use it, it will do, in fact, that. And if we don't use it, we're going to lose it. In fact, we're going to lose all our rights if the impending communism takes full hold. And that happens when your police and your military are on side with it and are attacking you. And not when there's a handful of psyops where the police involved that you see, like Adamson Barbecue. That was a psyop. That was to scare you. Oh my God, if I open my business, they're going to have horses and arresting me and dragging my customers out of my... I don't want that. Okay, that wasn't Toronto Police. That was John Tory, communist John Tory, and public health hiring out of your taxpayers' money off-duty police officers for private security to make a show. That's what that was. And then you have other players pounding that, every week when they're doing speeches going, oh, look what they did to Adamson Barbecue. Look what they did. And there's a few others. There's like about 5 psyops. And they had to play those over and over at you to convince you that we're already communist country. Canada. No, we're not. And 5 psyops doesn't conquer doesn't mean that the country's conquered. We're not conquered. Police have our back. Military has our back. Not all police. In Ontario, regional police and OPP and military have our back. They haven't moved against the people. OPP have made some moves against the people, and they've made a public statement that they are willing to enforce these rinky dink bylaws that are not capable of changing the scope of police power. That's preposterous. Absolutely preposterous. Most people don't understand that because they don't know the dynamic of the law making process. But police power comes from the Criminal Code of Canada, and the province can't make a rinky-dink bylaw to change the level of police power that's described or prescribed from the Canadian Bill of Rights, the Criminal Code of Canada. And police know that, and that's why in Ontario they refused to enforce the stay-at-home order. They refused to bash into your house and count and see if you have more people than 5 because the neighbors said they saw 7. And they refused to burst into your business as well. There was some cases where court orders were acquired, and I believe illegally acquired, because public health was presenting there is a danger, and it was related to COVID, and COVID is an operation in risk of danger, not danger. And so the police weren't doing that. The police, at some level, if public health pursues a court order and they get the preliminary one, and then they go for the permanent one with police enforcement, and the person is either not defending themselves at all, their rights, or they're using the charter, then they're able to get that, because the charter isn't a proper defense. For another day. But if you use the Bill of Rights, that is a proper defense, and you can stop them from getting the second injunction. First one, they run there and they do it without notice, and they tell the court there's a danger and they need an injunction right now without any notice to the person, and they get it because the court sort of, how do you say, sides on the side of precaution or caution, and then you have an opportunity to bring it back and refute it. So that's what's open to people. But a lot of people don't understand that, or they don't have the resources, or the lawyers don't cooperate in doing those kinds of strong actions against the government. Whatever the case might be, there's been some difficulty in bringing a good challenge to those injunctions. There hasn't been many of them, though. There's just been a handful of them. And there was 2 cases that I know that were bringing up the Bill of Rights, and they just dropped everything. They didn't say we're dropping it because, and they didn't have a hearing and win because they used the Canadian Bill of Rights, but they folded because of the Canadian Bill of Rights. So it's got umph. So I spoke more than I intended to. I was just intending to tell you that the situation's changed. We now have the vaccine passport in regulation, but it's rinky dink. It doesn't have the power it needs to do to force businesses and schools and whatever to violate your right to privacy or your right to bodily integrity, whichever way you want to look at it. That would have to be, in order to violate your fundamental rights, there has to be a judicial precedent. And there's no judicial precedent that makes it okay for the government to trounce on your rights. With the Charter, they have the leeway in Section 1 to violate your rights. And then you have to go to court to reestablish them or whatever. But Bill of Rights, no, straight out of the gate, they don't have that right. So we're good to go. And I am confident we're going to win. People are taking action now, finally, in large numbers. We saw action all the way through, but in small numbers. Now their children are being threatened, their livelihoods being threatened, and they're going for it. So I expect we're going to see quite a bit of progress in the next month or 2. That's it for today.